Hello, and welcome to Awkward Family Conversations, an intergenerational discussion of topics of interest mainly to millennials and Gen Z Zoomers. I'm here with my daughter, Addie, as always. When she was in school, she took 7 years of French, took so much French. Her senior year, she had no French left to take, so she had to do independent study, and none of it was any good when we went on vacation to Montreal.
Well, I've been roasted. Let me set some things straight here. There was a French class that I could take, and I was the only one who took it.
I
And
see.
two, I was not yet in any high level French class when we went to Montreal. So, for the record,
So you're saying it would have been different. You would have been able to understand the Quebecois had you had another couple of years of French.
no one understanding Quebecois, and also no, because I was extraordinarily anxious.
Yes. Well, hello,
But
Addie.
hi, Dad. I'm here with my father, Rhett, who just roasted me royally. And my Rhett trivia for this week.
You
I
didn't
had
think
it and
about
then I
this, did
forgot
you?
it. I actually forgot I literally thought I need to write these down. I
Yeah.
keep My Rhett trivia is that he refuses to let himself be called the dad of his pets.
I'm not the dad of my pets. I'm your dad. I'm not the dad of my pets.
You're Roxy's father, and you know
Roxy's one.
it.
Roxy being the dog.
Anyway, last week we talked about how to find a job while you're working another job, and we actually do have a follow-up item from our super fan Mike that the example that my father so kindly included and did not actually tell me what the example was a little dark, and gonna have to agree with that one.
It's a
That's
little
all.
intense.
That's it.
A little intense, yes.
A little intense, but today hopefully we can spare the really intense anecdotes and just talk about how to balance our income versus job satisfaction.
Yes, we're going to tackle sort of the love versus money question. Only in this case about as it relates to work. Um, we needed to. We're trying to assess whether you want to follow jobs for the money they pay, the compensation, or because it's what you love. Because sometimes there's conflict. So we did 2 minutes of internet research to see if this in fact was a thing or if it was just something that occurred to Addie. Um, so what do we know? What do we know about income versus job satisfaction? Well, we do know, as we talked about 2 or 3 episodes ago, that about 2/3 of employees in the United States are not engaged with their jobs. About half, just over half, are not engaged, just meaning they're sort of ambivalent about their work, where about 12% or so are actively disengaged. So they're really taking actions that undermine their company and their job performance. So we know that at least 2/3 of of the people, of the workers in the United States, are not choosing love of job as much as perhaps they're choosing income or some other factor. We'll have to dig into this a little bit more. Also, the Harvard Business Review had an article that talked about some generational differences in terms of the priorities when it comes to work. So maybe not exactly what we, not exactly perhaps what we are looking for, but it's informative nonetheless. So if you're on the podcast, you're not going to see this. If you're watching us on video, you can see this chart. It's from Gallup, survey of 1,700 U.S. workers, and the millennials here are in orange, the Gen Xers are in green, and the baby boomers are in blue. And these are the percentage of each of those generations who ranked these 10, it looks like 9 or 10 factors as extremely important when it comes time to apply for a new job. And these are ordered in the order that the millennials, in descending order in terms of importance to millennials. You'll see that the opportunity to learn and grow, which equates more or less to job satisfaction, is very high for millennials, particularly given the, comparatively speaking to Gen Xers and baby boomers. So looking at the scale, it's a little challenging, but I'd say that probably, high 50s percentage of millennials felt that the opportunity to learn and grow was extremely important when they were applying for a job, whereas Gen Xers and baby boomers both under 50% and probably closer to 40 in both cases. Other things that are important to millennials, more important to overall compensation, which finished sixth for millennials, quality of manager, quality of management, interest in the type of work, again, something that's correlated to sort of, I love my job. I want to do a job that I enjoy. And then opportunity for advancement. All of those were more important to more millennials than overall compensation. And so, interesting, Gen X is really kind of, well, relatively speaking, Gen X, the most important things to the Gen X was the quality of management. And then the second thing was quality of manager. For baby boomers, it was really all about the quality of manager, quality of management, followed closely by interest in type of work. So anyway, some interesting items here. Addie, when you're thinking about applying for a job, how would you rank these various things? What would you say is maybe the 2 or 3 things that are most important to you when you're looking at applying for a job?
Definitely opportunity to learn and grow, interest, and just like, I guess, the fun place to work thing. Those are my top 3.
Okay, so all of those are
I do have a question.
Yes.
For any Gen X listeners. And that question is, are you okay? Because this is sad, guys.
Yeah, they're not really. Interest in type of work and opportunity to learn and grow were higher than organization encourages creativity, organization is a fun place to work, an informal work environment, but not as high as quality of manager, quality of management, and overall compensation. Overall compensation was third for the Gen Xers.
Are they good? Are they doing okay? Is everything all right at home? Like, do y'all need to talk?
Well, if you're a Gen Xer, listen to this and you want to weigh in, by all means, please do. All right, so we'll turn that off. And then one more data point that we uncovered. One of my favorite authors, scholars, Nobel laureates is Daniel Kahneman. And in 2010, so this is a little bit dated, he was part of a large study done by the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. And they looked at about 400 or 420,000 people and, did a very exhaustive analysis basically around happiness. And, what was interesting is they found that money doesn't bring happiness per se, but lack of money brings misery and up to a threshold. Basically, when you don't have enough money to live comfortably, and I mean that without stress, without a lot of stress, because everybody has stress, but without financial stress, so that you have enough money to pay for a place to live that you find adequate, that you have enough money to feed yourself, kind of Maslow's hierarchy, right? When you're taking care of those basic needs for food, shelter, security, then, if you don't have resources to do that, it adds stress, and a little bit more money or a lot more money can help alleviate some of that stress. But when you hit, at that time, it was $75,000 a year in income, then any marginal dollar, any additional dollar did not bring you any more happiness, any more enjoyment. It did not lessen your sadness, and it did not lessen your stress. So there was an upper limit of, at what point money ceased to be a very important factor in your life's happiness. So basically what that says to me is you need the lack hurts you after you achieve a certain level of income. And on average, at that time, that level of income was around $75,000. Now, interestingly, our median income which means 50% of the people in the US make less and 50% make more. In 2018, so 8 years after this study that showed 75K is kind of that inflection point where you no longer need, or you no longer feel, where money ceases to matter to your happiness. The median income is only $62,000, so a little over 80% of that threshold. So perhaps it's not surprising that we've got 2/3 of our people who are not engaged with their work, because they could be making that trade-off between working at a job that they don't find engaging, or they don't engage with their work because they're not interested in it, they don't feel passion towards it, but perhaps it gives them that extra money that makes up for it on the other side, that it reduces the stress elsewhere in their life, so they're willing to put up with a job maybe that's not quite as fulfilling because it does pay more, which alleviates some of the financial stress. So maybe they're kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul kind of a scenario here, where they're where they're sub-optimizing what they can do at work in order to optimize what they can do in the rest of their life, at least financially. So it is a thing, apparently. I would say that trade-off between job satisfaction and income is definitely a thing.
Okay, so basically, I should sell my soul for $75,000 a year then.
You should sell your soul until you get to 70. No. So, we're dealing with averages, right? So for everybody's, that point where that inflection point where money ceases to become a factor in your happiness is going to be different for everybody. And so you should know yourself, know what you're willing to do. Trading one misery for another, taking a job you hate, is probably selling your soul. If you wanted to become a lawyer or a stockbroker or something, one of these high paying careers, if that was going to make you miserable, it may not be worth that trade-off. But if money is a significant stressor in your life, the fact that, or the lack of money in this case, is a significant stressor, that you can't live, you don't feel safe because you can't live in a place that you want, you're going hungry because you can't afford to eat on the wages you're making, then it might be worth a trade-off not to take a job you hate, but to take a better paying job that you can tolerate, because then your trade-off could be a net positive, that you could reduce your stress, with the stress in your life that's caused by finances. You could reduce that more than you would be sacrificing your your excitement and your energy and your peace of mind for a job that wouldn't be maybe your ideal job. So as always, I'd say probably the answer depends. You should know, what sort of minimum standard of living you're willing to put up with, and then find the least objectionable, or put the inverse way, the most pleasurable job, the most enjoyable job you can find that will pay you that amount of money. But I think we can talk more, because I think as Claire walks by, I think we can, talk a little bit more about, as we've talked about before, none of this stuff is fixed long term. That, any relationship, and an employment relationship is very much a relationship, is dynamic, and it changes over time. You change, circumstances change, company changes, and opportunities change. And so just because you're stuck now doesn't mean that you're stuck forever. So, making that trade-off doesn't have to be a forever thing.
Cool.
But you might, if you're not making enough money right now to do the things you want to do, you might think about trying to reduce that stress that's caused by your finances. And
here's a pro tip.
What's that?
A very 2020 pro tip.
Yeah.
Take the job that's not paying you enough to do what you want to do, while it's literally impossible to do the things that you want to do because they are closed. And then maybe you can get a raise, and then by the time those things are open,
Well, that's true. Maybe you don't need quite as much money right now in the time of COVID when everything is not accessible. Your entertainment venues are shut down, and a lot of restaurants don't, are going out of business or are not available to you. Yeah, so maybe there is something let's not waste a good crisis.
Let's not waste a good crisis.
That's actually that's a well-known maxim in politics, because a crisis creates impetus for change. And if you're prepared to move in with answers why a particular policy that you advocate is better at this point in time, then you can probably advance it faster than in normal times when people are a little more reluctant to change, more reluctant to take the risk that change brings. And you can, what's that?
Like a pandemic.
Well, yes, absolutely. This is absolutely the crisis, and you actually can see it in the national discourse around national health care, for instance. I mean, you've got you had 20 million people out of work, and now that's down to between 8 and 9 million, which is still historically a very, very high
Just
percentage.
8 and 9 million.
It's a lot, and but those people are without health care, and so the folks that want a national answer, a public option at least, if not Medicare for all, are saying, they're not saying it in so many words, but let's not waste this pandemic. But hey, look, you guys who are out of work, who have been out of work and don't have health care, and you guys who don't have health care, vote. This is an election year. Vote in people that will bring you Medicare for all, or at least a public option, so that you do have health care even when you're not employed. And so, they're acting as acting in line with the maximum of let's not let this pandemic go to waste, as it relates to advancing our agenda. But they're not going to be quite so crass as to say it. But that's and that's not an uncommon thing, and nor is it, in my mind, sort of an evil thing to be doing. If you've got an answer and you can move the ball forward on it because of circumstances that have recently evolved, then that seems like it's all fair game. So,
well, then in a not 2020 perspective,
yes.
Did your 2 minutes of research reveal any ways to balance misery, so maybe you're a little miserable at home and at work?
Well, yeah. So let's revisit let's revisit something that we've talked about many, many times over the course of your life, and because it wasn't something that I was, and that's to be intentional about your career. Give it some thought, actually. And you've done very well. What's that?
That's new.
It's not new. And our loyal listeners will know that it is not new. Be intentional. Think about what it is that you'd like to do. Think about what it is that you'd want to do. Understanding that nothing's permanent, and you may change your mind, and it may turn out not to be. You think it sounds like a good idea, but it may turn out not to be a great idea. But be intentional. So give it some thought, and then develop a plan to execute against that intention. Because love and money are not necessarily mutually exclusive, right? Just because there are lots of jobs that you would probably love that will pay you enough to get to that happiness, that inflection point where happiness becomes, or money becomes, not a key factor in your happiness. And so, how do you get there? And the number one rule of economics of any market, and the labor market is a market, is what? Supply and demand sets prices. That's always true. Supply and demand sets prices. That's the first rule of economics. And the supply
is. The first rule of economics should be pay people so they can live.
That's not the first rule of economics. That's the first rule of a supportive government safety net that allows for social goods. Economics is an amoral system, not an immoral system, but an amoral system of how goods and services are produced at the most efficient the most efficient production of goods and services.
Well, economics is the reason I ended up not getting a BBA. So,
well, economics is one of those. I mean, they call it the dismal science for a reason, right? I mean, it's first of all, it's a social science, so there's not absolutes. It's not natural science where there's natural laws that govern it. A lot of economics, a lot of economic truths are contextual. What is good economic policy and a good economic process or a good economic situation when there's certain market conditions is not as effective or not as appropriate or not as desirable in a whole different set of circumstances. And that's, as you go through the economic cycle, your economic policies should probably vary. For instance, you shouldn't probably cut taxes in the middle of a long-running expansion, which is something we did a couple of years ago. Expansion is when you want to be putting money away for a rainy day so that when you do get a contraction like we've had related to the COVID-19 pandemic, you've got resources to put against it. Instead, you've emptied the cupboards and now you've got nothing. So you have to borrow against future revenues to be able to pay out and to sort of soften the blow of this economic contraction that we're seeing. And so, economic truths are not, truths might be too strong a word. Economic principles are contextual, I think. And so, in that sense, as a social science, there are no absolutes. There's always, you can always find anecdotes that will tell you, that will run counter to what is generally accepted and generally good policy. But it's also true that the economy takes out, I said it was an amoral, economics is amoral, it takes out morality. This is just about how people behave collectively and individually, and how they behave individually rolls up collectively, and it ends up with certain things that happen in the marketplace that we all have to respond to. But it doesn't assign a morality, typically doesn't assign a morality to them. So some of the most famous economists, and they didn't really consider themselves economists as much as they thought of themselves as either social engineers or social commentators, or people. John Maynard Keynes, I believe, was the one who really thought that what he was about was trying to help people be happy, trying to maximize happiness for a society. So he didn't really like the whole even though he was a brilliant economist, he wasn't really bought into that whole being represented, I think, as an economist. He had a more expansive view of his intellect. But anyway, supply and demand, how you want to pay people, and we can talk about universal basic income, which is essentially what you're talking about, or said differently, a minimum wage, whether you're working or not. Those are ways to get at some of the things that we're going to talk about here. So back to supply and demand in the labor market, though. The supply of workers is who can and is willing, and you got to be both, to work for a certain rate, and demand, and the demand side is on the part of the employers. How many workers do they need with the ability to produce what they want to produce? And so that intersection is where the price is set. And when you're talking about jobs, you're talking about, and we talked about this either last week or the week before when we started talking about, how do you find your dream job, and recognize that it's a little bit of a power imbalance. Employers have a lot more information than you do, and as a result, they're probably able to pay less than they would normally pay if job seekers had as much knowledge as they do. So, there's a few ways to try to increase your value, which is to say your price in the marketplace, which is to say your compensation, your salary. What do you think? Why do employers pay more for some jobs than they do for others? What do you think? What would either decrease the supply or increase the demand for a worker such that they would command a higher rate of pay than other people who could or who could do the minimum part of their job.
See, I want to say like education or dangerous jobs, but that's not necessarily true though. Like,
well, it may be not true again, and I mean, and again, no absolutes, right, in economics, but it is true that both jobs that require more training are going to have fewer people who can do them because not everybody is going to want to invest the time and the money to get those skills, knowledge, and experience that makes them more valuable. You know, those people that have to invest money and time into a career like a doctor. You know, a doctor invests 8 years and a lot of times, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars if they're a specialty practitioner. They're not going to work for minimum wage, right? And so employers have to pay them more because there aren't, you know, there aren't very many people who have those skills and who are willing to work for less than a certain amount because they've invested in their careers. So yeah, so education is absolutely one of the things that differentiates on pay. The more education you need, typically, not always, not universally, because of course this is economics and there are no absolutes, but typically the higher the wage is. And then you said dangerous. Yeah, working conditions. That's, you know, if you're, you know, and you don't have to be, you know, an oil rig worker is probably going to get paid a whole lot more than a garbage collector because it's a whole lot more dangerous and a lot less convenient, right? You got to be out, you know, a garbage collector can go home at night to his or her family. Whereas the oil rig worker is stuck on an oil rig for 2 weeks at a time, or, you know, however, you know, wherever that is and however long that is. So it's inconvenient. It's, you know, they don't get to have much of a life outside of their work while they're on site. You know, consultants, very high paid jobs typically, but they're on the road all the time. You know, they have an apartment that they come home to on Friday night and they're there for 2 nights and they leave on Sunday morning or Sunday afternoon to get to their next gig. You know, that's a lot. You got to pay somebody, you know, so it's about the sacrifice, and danger is certainly part of the sacrifice, but it's also inconvenience. It's also working conditions. I mean, you know, you know, the garbage collector is probably going to get paid a little bit more than the people who walk around picking trash up in the park, just because it's a little bit more demanding, physically demanding. Hours are, you know, you got to be up super early. You know, you're working when nobody else is, and you're working around a lot of smelly stuff. And so, not to stereotype sanitation workers, but you know, that's, you know, certainly working conditions is certainly another thing that comes into play. What else? What other things might cause an employer to pay more for a job?
being a man.
Well, not saying that's well, yes. While that has proven historically to be true, less so today than before, but still egregiously so. But why is that? Why were men traditionally paid more?
Bullshit, sexism.
All right. Well, I get a Venmo tally.
That was worth it. That one was worth it.
All right. Yeah. Well, sexism, right? But where did that come from? It came from a belief that women were going to have children and step out of the workplace, right? And wouldn't be as available and wouldn't be as productive. It also went from, you know, a lot of. I mean, that would be an example of somebody thinking rationally. It also was that, well, you know, men are the breadwinners. They have to bring in more. You know, all these kind of things that aren't necessarily true, that we're sexist for sure. But what else, you know, what else could there be? I mean, one of the things that I think about is that, you know, what if you can make a difference in your job relative to another person in your job, and this is certainly what you see in sales roles and in other performance-based jobs, is that if you can make a difference, if you can bring in more clients, you're going to get paid more. And it's true, really, for jobs that are not even production-based, like a sales job is. I mean, if I'm a manager of a team and I can get the team to produce 20% more, then the company should be willing to pay me more than they'd be willing to pay a different manager who could ostensibly, you know, be as qualified as I am in the same position. And so, the ability to produce more, which comes with sort of, different skills and talents and aptitudes, and it's very hard to measure that potential. It really only shows up as the production happens, and only if you can actually quantify with a degree of precision what that production really is. And so, that ability to deliver more than somebody else in that role often results in higher pay as well. So what is, these are all things that if you're intentional about your career and you find yourself in an area that you like, that's not paying you as much. So let's say, you're a millennial and you're what's that?
And you're a vet tech.
And well, yeah, actually, let's talk about that right now. So, so let's think about this. So, again, we're not saying, we talked about, kind of the dynamic relationship here with, in the workplace, that it's not static. It's not like you come in, you agree to do a job, you do that job for 40 years. It never changes. Nothing ever changes. Your satisfaction level, is the same, and your goals are the same as in 40 years of when you start. Yeah, that's just doesn't happen. It doesn't happen on any of those dimensions. The company is going to change. You're going to change. The nature of your work is going to change. Customers are going to change. Your other stakeholders are going to change. So it's going to be a dynamic situation. The pain of no money is something you feel every day, though. And it's tempting to say, well, you know what? I just need to find a job that's going to pay me more and let me get out of this thing that I actually enjoy, because I need the bigger paycheck, because that'll help me reduce my stress tremendously, and it's worth it, even if it takes me out of something that I really enjoy. Maybe a different, if you're feeling like I've just got to cut bait and go, I've got to make this short-term decision. It's going to take me off my long-term path. A long-term path that I think I can be, that I can enjoy and find work that I can engage with. Maybe what we need to do is sort of say, well, try to figure out short-term answers that lessen the pain, but don't take you out of that career path that you're going on. And I think that's the chance. So let's talk about your vet tech role, right? Okay, so how are as you think about those things that make a difference in pay, education, training, knowledge and skills, experience, change, working conditions. Now that's something that you're probably not going to take on, but maybe there's opportunities for you to do more work over, maybe there's a differential for working overnight, or, coming in early or something like that. So, how does that manifest itself in what you do? So you're a veterinary assistant right now, and you get
licensed vet tech, essentially.
A licensed vet tech.
Unlicensed
vet tech, right.
So I do what the vet techs do, but I don't have the credentials, so I can't say I'm a vet tech, but our practice treats us interchangeably.
Okay. But they pay you less than they pay a vet tech, a licensed vet tech, correct?
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
How much less?
50 cents.
50 cents?
Yeah.
Well, so that's not a huge...
No, it's not.
A huge difference.
It is not.
So you getting the technician...
Well, that's the starting rate anyway. I started 50 cents less than what I've talked to other licensed vet techs have started at.
Okay, so that's 4% less than what, just under 4% less than what they make. Mm-hmm. So that's not what I would call a life-changing difference.
No.
If you were to get the license.
However, that being said, at other practices, licensed vet techs start about $5 more than I do.
And that's substantially more. That would be more like 30% or 40% higher, which is a substantial difference.
There is definitely, it depends on the practice for sure.
Okay.
And working conditions, it's not something everybody thinks about, but it is actually kind of a dangerous job. I deal with a lot of really aggressive dogs who can easily take my face off if they wanted to.
Yeah.
And I've been in a couple situations where it's almost happened. So that's one of those things where it's like, I feel like we probably should get paid more, but that's not a practice issue. That's an industry issue. That's not my clinic. It's just how, young female employees who work in a customer-facing job are treated in any working industry.
Well, and that's because there are a lot of young female workers willing to work in that industry. So,
That's true, but
The
it's
supply is high. The supply of
it's also
workers
just
like that
the
are
money
high.
that gets poured into it, what people are willing to invest in veterinary clinics, because most veterinary doctors, I mean, like there's significantly more men in the veterinary doctor side than there is on any other area of veterinary medicine. But even then, compared to the amount of male human doctors, there's more female veterinary doctors. So there's also a lot of sexism things that come into how much people are willing to invest and what people think those practices are worth, and also just how people treat their animals, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, it's definitely one of those things where it's like, right, I love this job, so I will not go out to eat this month.
Well, and so you're making those sacrifices, but how long are you going to be willing to make those sacrifices? And so you're willing to do it right now. But is there a path forward for you to close that gap between, the $75,000 where money becomes less of an issue, or
Well, I
whatever
have
that
a
number is for
performance
you?
evaluation this month, so let's hope.
I'm sorry, what?
I have a performance evaluation this month, so let's hope there's a path.
Well, and so, remember, this is a two-way street. It's not just what they decide to pay you; it's what you demand to work. Now, if you can't come to agreement on what that is, then, then you'll part. But if you can come to agreement on it, I guess my point here is, in the context of our conversation here, is, what are there can be oftentimes ways for you to sort of have your cake and eat it too. You found a job that you like. You found a job that is satisfying, that you enjoy the day-to-day interactions, but it may not be working for you financially. And even if it's working for you today financially, it might not be working for you, a year from now financially. So the question is, people in those situations, can you find ways that you can create where you can lessen the supply of competitors for your job by willing to sacrifice more that other people are not willing to sacrifice, by investing in knowledge, skills, and experience that will demonstrably make you more attractive and have your employer willing to pay more, or create a difference in the things that matter to the success of in your case, the practice, but in the success of the company, so that, that they'll be willing to pay you more because you produce more, you create more revenue, or whatever it is that most companies are going for revenue. But if you're in a nonprofit, maybe it's about attracting users and people to use services, or to, so whatever it is that your company values and wants you to produce, can you do things to increase that, so that you become more valuable to them, either because you're competing with fewer people, and therefore the price goes up, or because you're producing more, and that creates a higher demand for your services on the part of your employers.
So if you see anybody coming in for an interview after you interview, murder them, and therefore there are less people.
I'm not sure that's a real long-term strategy that's going to be successful, though. You can try that, but just by eliminating one person, I'm not sure you're going to reduce the total supply of people that are out there, and it puts you at risk yourself of not being available to be part of the supply. So it's that third person. That third person benefits tremendously by having people out of the equation now.
Convince somebody else to murder all the competition and then get them arrested, and now you are the one who gets hired.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, morality of that might be a little sketchy there, but but conceptually, an economist could see value in that approach. Actually.
Well, it went from chaotic evil to chaotic neutral, so there's a little bump there.
Little bump up. I get it. Yeah. So anyway, I would say that if you can find, I'm always about find the thing you like, and if you're intentional, you can get there. Again, you may not be there right now, but you can move towards it, so that you can spend the bulk of your career doing something that you like, that can also meet where you can get to that inflection point where you're happy. Because I tell you, the alternative, I've been engaged at work, and I've been disengaged, not actively disengaged, but I've been not engaged at work. And I would say most of my time in my professional career was spent not engaged. but ambivalent, kind of like, yeah, it's a decent job. I like the people I work with. It's, I don't object to what the company's doing. Those are pretty sort of faint praise, but that's how I think. Obviously, a lot of people are living their lives, and wouldn't it be better that you look forward to going to work, right? It's kind of like, okay, I get to do this thing. That's fun. I'm excited about that. That's a much better place to be. At the end of the day, when you're kind of a little disappointed, not crushed, but a little disappointed, you got to leave because you're enjoying what you do. We should all strive to be those people who enjoy that work so much that it's kind of like, oh, well, shoot, the day's over and I wasn't done yet, but okay, I'll pick it up tomorrow, and excited to come to work. And if you're not there, how can you get there? And again, sort of set your intention, figure out a path. And it doesn't have to be, super detailed, but, look for those opportunities to, increase your value by adding those, that extra knowledge, that extra skills, that extra experience. Be willing to sacrifice a little bit more, come in on a weekend if you need to. I mean, that makes you very valuable to an employer if you're willing to do stuff that not everybody else is willing to do. That will show up longer term. And again, there's no absolute. So sometimes you're going to get a jerk of a boss who's going to just expect that and not give you any kind of reward for it. But typically, companies will recognize those folks that are adding more value, and then find those places where you can increase the production. Bring ideas like, hey, maybe we should offer this service because nobody else is doing it. We might be able to get some more business this way. And here's how we can do that. And and if you can become the person who delivers on that, then now you've increased production, and that's you're going to prove yourself valuable to the firm that way, and they'll be willing to invest more in you. And so even if you're not where you want to be financially, and you have found something you like to do, it doesn't mean you can't get there financially. And so just something to that's the kind of way to think about it. I think is that when it comes down to the question of love your job or love your paycheck. Love your job to me is probably a little bit more important, but figure out how you can get your paycheck to a point where, you're living comfortably and you don't have those financial stressors elsewhere in your life. And if you're in a position where you are having financial stressors, maybe make a short-term compromise to say, okay, I'm going to take this job and I'm going to go to night school, or I'm going to get this additional training. So I'm going to get the job that I need, pay enough for me to get by now because I've got a family to support, or I've got student debt to pay off elsewhere, or whatever other,
got a cat.
Or you have a cat that eats a lot or whatever. Maybe make the short term, but have a plan to get back on that track that says, okay, but I'm only going to do this while I'm doing this other thing. That's going to make me more attractive and back in line with the kind of work that I want to do. Because, as we saw from the Harvard Business Review article, the Gallup survey, you've got, the millennials, it's really important to millennials, the kind of work that they're doing. And this has come up in other articles that I've read too. Millennials in particular are very interested in, doing things, enjoying it, having a positive work experience. Whereas I think previous generations were, our Gen Xers, for instance, more interested in, let me get a job that's going to be stable and safe. And, millennials, and it'd be interesting to sort of see where the Gen Z folks end up. But, I can see them being very much in line, just with my limited exposure to them, very much in line with the millennials, that they're looking for work that matters to them individually, that they find enjoyable. So don't give that up just in pursuit of the paycheck. See how you can, if you're in a job, if you're lucky enough to be in a job that pays you well, that you love, great. But if you're in a job that you like and you're not getting enough pay, think about how you can stay in that job and still, work your way over a few years up into that, that financial place where you'll be comfortable. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does indeed.
Very good. All right. Well, I think that's what we have today. We've got no follow-up items, but we do have a Venmo. We do have a Venmo issue.
My phone's across the room, so I'll do it after.
So for those of you who don't know, anytime one of us uses a bad word in our broadcast, he or she has to Venmo the other one $1. Today,
I stand by this one.
used a bad word in context, however, and was happy to pay the price. So
last week, not worth it. This one was worth it.
No, but I'm $2 richer now thanks to this podcast.
All Claire's fault.
Last week was Claire's fault.
Last week was entirely
just
Claire's
the sexist nature of our society, our business world. Very good. All right, so that's it for today.
All right, well then, our lovely listeners and our super fans, one super fan now, can find us on awkwardfamilyconversations.com, at Twitter, at awkwardfamilyc1. Thank you, Dad, for writing down and sending me that name. YouTube, Facebook under Awkward Family Conversations, and Stitcher, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your favorite podcasts, also under Awkward Family Conversations. Just let us know what you think, comment on videos, keep those questions and suggestions coming. And next week we can tackle what can I expect for my career arc?
Interesting. We'll look forward to that then.
All right.
All right.
So,
I love you, Dad.
Oh, said at the same time. Love you too.
All right. See you next week.